This is not a gear channel, and I don't plan on doing very many technical reviews. However, there are some cameras that genuinely inspire true creativity once you get them in your hands, and the Mamiya 7II is absolutely one of those cameras. Now, I know prices have skyrocketed on these things over the years, and this legendary piece of kit has become quite expensive, but I bought mine for $250. And if you stick around to the end of the video, I will teach you how to do the exact same thing. But first, do the intro.
Came through dripping Aquafina, I'm sipping 15, kept a weapon on me. Blow make digits, I'm on my business, stack chicken like what it's gon' be. Crew in the cut, hey, you want us red run when I tell a bit peace. Love is love. Love is love. Adios. Bendo with the switch again. Boy deliver like he heffing. Core with digits, give him estimates. Somersaults for my Benjamins.
What's going on, beautiful people? My name is Quintavious Oliver, and yeah, that's right, I bought this thing for $250. Well, not this exact one, but we'll get to that story at the end of this video. If you could go ahead and hit the subscribe button if you have not already, smash that like button, yeah, do all the violent things to your computer before we get into this gear review. I can't believe I'm actually doing one of these, but I do really want to talk about this camera because I think it is, at very least, in the top 3 best film cameras ever made. Fight me if you disagree in the comments. Now, the Mamiya 7II is the successor to the Mamiya 7 and the Mamiya 6 cameras, both legendary in their own right. But this has been a staple in my kit for the last several years. You see behind me, I've got some prints up. These have either gone out to or are about to go out to several different galleries, and I love this camera for all the reasons you see behind me. You see, I think a lot of people in 2025 have become so accustomed to looking at things on screens that we forget that these cameras were made in an era where nobody was looking at the internet. These cameras were created to make giant prints, to run ads, to create immersive worlds. And if you're not doing that, you're only getting half of what these cameras are worth. And like I said in the intro, these things are expensive. But let's talk about why for a moment. Now, I've got 3 lenses here, the 43mm f4.5, which has been all but glued to this camera since I got it several years ago. I absolutely love this wide angle lens. And contrary to how most people would use this camera, I am, again, not a landscape photographer. I like to make portraits, mostly atmospheric portraits in people's homes or in various environments. And I like to get as much context as I can. And over the last few years, I've learned how to see without looking through this viewfinder with the field of view that this viewfinder provides. Now, if you're gonna use this 43mm lens, you've got to use the accessory viewfinder. Sometimes when you buy this lens, it'll come with it. Sometimes they're black, sometimes they're gray. I've got the gray one, but this is going to show you exactly what this lens is going to shoot. If you don't use this, you're limited to what this camera shoots natively, and I think that starts with the 55mm lens. Wow, really, you guys? Really? This is what happens when you let your daughter bring cats into the house. 0 out of 10. Do not do it. Don't listen to the kids. Leave the cats outside. This is going to allow you to see what this extreme wide angle lens is going to give you. And it gives you about a 21mm equivalent field of view on 35mm film. And while that might sound super wide to a lot of people, this thing is edge to edge sharp. I don't have to worry about any weird vignetting or anything bowing in. You don't get that fisheye effect like a 90s hip hop video. While I do love the 90s era of hip hop, I don't want my photos to feel like that. This thing just, it's rectilinear, everything's straight up and down on the edges. And I love that. I love how clean and crisp this thing is. It gives me such good detail, which is required in this body of work, that I can read books across the room. I can see the text on various objects, or what people have in the refrigerators, all these little things that make up the story of who we are in our homes and what it's like to be human. I get all that detail, all that context with this lens right here. Now, there's also a 55mm lens that I have never used, but I do love this 65. The 65 I've been using for about 10 years now for mostly portrait and fashion projects. Before I got into making atmospheric portraits, I made most of my photographs with this lens right here. I think, for all intents and purposes, it is pretty much perfect. If you only had one lens for this camera, I would forego the 80, although legendary, and go for the 65. It gives you a little bit more flexibility, and I would look at it kind of like the Fujifilm X100 series of cameras. It's gonna give you about a 35, maybe 40 millimeter field of view. I don't have the numbers right on me, but I'll put them down at the bottom of the screen so you can see what all these are equivalent to. The next lens in the series is the 80, the legendary kit lens that comes with this camera most of the time. I've never actually used it, never seen it, never put hands on it. But I've seen nothing but magnificent photographs that come out of that lens. I do, however, have the 150, and while I've owned this lens for a very long time, I think I've maybe used it 5 times. I don't really care for lenses tighter than a 50. I think, do I even own a 50 mil? I think the longest lens I own is a 35. But this 150 is fantastic if you are a portrait shooter or you just want to get those details from far away. And then there's the 250. That one is a hit or miss for me. You do also need an auxiliary finder kind of like this one, but I don't really see a use case for such a long lens on a rangefinder camera. Kind of like how most people don't care for 135 or longer lenses on Leica M cameras. This one, or the 250 is kind of like that. The 150 is kind of right there at the edge of what I find useful. If you have to use a 3-lens kit, I think this is the one to go for. The 43, the 65, and the 150 as a kit are just magnificent. You couldn't ask for more. Now, this camera isn't without its quirks, and while I don't see any fault in these quirks, a lot of people do. First off, it's electronic. A lot of people are worried about if it's going to fail, or rather, it's not a matter of if, but when. Now, I haven't had any issues out of mine, and I've been shooting with it almost daily for over a decade now. And I love the fact that it's electronic. If I'm honest, I don't care about it not being this mechanical masterpiece. The meter in this is fantastic. Many of you guys have been asking me in the comments, especially on Instagram, what I'm doing to light my pictures. I'll be honest with you, there's no secret sauce. I just use the meter in this guy. It is fantastic, and I don't think that there's any reason why anyone needs to shoot this thing on manual. If you're shooting in harsh lighting, mixed lighting, whatever, this thing just meters for it. I've set it on aperture priority or AEL. I meter for my highlights, and boom, I've got a photograph. All I have to do is compose it, set my aperture, my ISO, and it's there. If there is any secret sauce, it's not in the camera. It would be in this stuff right here, Cinestill 800T. It is my favorite film, and I don't care how you feel about Cinestill as a company, this will continue to be a staple in my kit. I've used it for pretty much all of my living room series, and while I would love it if Cinestill would come down on their prices because this stuff is not cheap, I have no reason to stop using it. What I have started doing though, and over the past few years it's kind of been my go-to, is just developing my own film. I know it can be time consuming and C41 scares a lot of people, but if you can tie your shoes without looking, you can develop your own film. And I tend to use the Cinestill kit. Arista makes another great C41 kit. I develop it right behind me in my kitchen, and I get good results, or at least I like to think I get good results. The other films that I like using are the creative films, the Lomochrome turquoise, and while I'm not a artsy-fartsy kind of creative person in that regard, I think this stuff is pretty cool, and when you're using it with such large negatives, it's almost kind of painterly in a way. I think this stuff is more suited for folks who like abstract or nature or what have you. I've tried making portraits with it. They can look kind of otherworldly, but I bought a bunch of this stuff several years ago, and I think I've still got the majority of it left. So while it is fun, it doesn't really serve a purpose in my kit. Maybe some of the photos I'm throwing up will inspire some of you guys to use it. A couple of other things about this camera though, all the lenses are leaf shutter lenses. And that allows me, when I'm in tight spaces, smaller places, to kind of be more of a fly on the wall. I love the idea of the Mamiya RB and RZ cameras. While they are heavy, they are great cameras. And I like the idea of the waist level viewfinders. The mirror slap in those, and it's just loud, clunky, chunky, like a truck. I'm not a truck kind of person. I'm not a big camera kind of person. The Pentax 672, also a fantastic camera. Fell in love with that for the little time that I was using it. Again, mirror slap, and just vibrations, and it's got all these other things that when you're working in tight spaces with families don't work out. A leaf shutter allows me to shoot down to sometimes a half of a second if I haven't had coffee and my hands aren't doing that. So take a deep breath, ease onto the shutter. This thing is very, very still, very, very quiet. Let me see if I can let you guys hear it. One of the byproducts of having a leaf shutter camera or leaf shutter lenses is you can actually flash sync to any speed. And while I don't use flash, a lot of studio photographers love that. You can also put a cable release right here. And one thing that I've actually found myself using more often is the self-timer on here. I actually used the self-timer to make a self-portrait with my daughter while we were changing spark plugs on our BMW. And that really helped me to see the use case for something like that. I guess if you were in a really dimly lit space or needed something not to move and you didn't have a cable release, that self-timer comes in handy, particularly if you're shooting at slow shutter speeds. And here I was thinking self-timers were just for vacation selfies or whatever, but it's a useful feature. You also get a multi-exposure mode on here. I've never used that aside from just now when I let you all hear the shutter. You cannot fire this camera if it doesn't have film in it without using the multi-feature. One other thing that I think is really cool though, and I love the idea that they thought about this, is because this is a rangefinder camera and because it's so small, you do have to use a little curtain down here at the bottom when you're changing your lenses, and that keeps your film from getting exposed to light while you are changing your lenses. You just turn the little dial on the bottom, bring the curtain over, swap out your lenses, make sure you hit the button to bring the shutter back. I have raised my camera to my eye a number of different times to try and hit the shutter button and nothing happens because I didn't withdraw that shutter. But that allows you to change your lenses in pretty much any lighting without having to worry about exposing your film. Now, I truly appreciate those of you who have stuck with me this long, and I know you're waiting to hear about how I ended up with this camera for $250, and I'll be honest with you, it's not rocket science. It might take a little bit of patience and some tenacity on your part, but what I actually did was, a while back, I flipped cameras for a little extra income, and I would go to estate sales and different shops and pick up cameras, refurbish them, and then sell them on eBay. Over the years though, with film photography making a huge comeback, it's been a little harder to find different bargains on cameras. However, if you go to certain pawn shops or antique malls, a lot of folks bring stuff in from storage units. I know a lot of guys who buy storage units, and what I did was I walked into a pawn shop and asked the guy, hey man, do you have any old film cameras? He looked at me crazy like, why the heck would you want an old film camera? Nobody shoots film anymore. And I said, well, I happen to shoot film. He told me I was crazy, but asked me to leave my card because there happens to be a guy that comes in every few days bringing in various camera equipment and other doodads. So I left my card with him and thought nothing of it. A couple of days later, I was actually on a shoot when I got a phone call from a guy, hey man, got a couple of cameras here. I heard you were in the market for one. You want to meet up a little bit later? I'll let you take a look at them. Of course, I said yes. So we met at a local coffee shop. He opens up this tote bag full of cameras and I started pulling them out one by one. There was a Canon Elan, there were a couple of broken Nikon N70s, N80s, and what have you. And at the bottom of that bag, there was a Mamiya 7II, a 150, and a 60. I did my best to keep my breathing steady and exercise my best poker face, despite vibrating all over and my excitement wanting to shoot out of my ears. And I told him that I couldn't take any of his cameras except for this one. This was the only one that wasn't broken, and it was the bottom of that bag. And he looks at me and he says, well, make me an offer. I told him, hey man, I only have $200 in my pocket right now, and I don't want to offer you that. Well, son, I know what these cameras go for. I looked them up on eBay and I can't accept that. No harm, no foul. He packed up his cameras and he left. I never thought I'd see that camera again, but later on that evening, I got another phone call from that gentleman who informed me that he was unable to find a shop that would take his camera. He said that if I met him within the next 30 minutes, he would sell me that camera and all its lenses for $250. Well, I happened to be at a bar at that time and I was drinking way too much then. And I asked my friend, hey man, I will give you $50 if you drive me to the other side of town. Got to meet this guy with the storage unit. Of course, he thought I was crazy. It's like midnight at this point. What are we doing? This seems really sketch. Well, it was sketch. It was a very rough area. Zero regrets. The guy showed up, he tosses the bag over the fence, I hand him the cash money. My friend looks at me like, did we just do a drug deal? We get in the car, I open the bag, he looks at me in disbelief. I'm still in shock. But yeah, $250. Moral of the story is closed mouths don't get fed. And the best way that I've found to acquire older cameras, especially the super expensive ones, is to find old camera shops who are going out of business, or people who buy storage units. These things are oftentimes just sitting around collecting dust, and if they've been stored correctly in climate-controlled facilities, you don't have to worry about things like internal mold or fungus or things like that. A lot of times these cameras are so well kept that they look almost new when you get them. Storage units are the perfect place. Estate sales are great. Pawn shops, maybe not so much, but it's not about what you know, it's who you know. And that's a great place to network with people who will go out and do the shopping for you. So while it's not a straightforward path, just waking up and finding a Mamiya 7 for $250, again, closed mouths don't get fed. And I really hope a lot of you guys get lucky off of what I just told you. And you know, sometime soon you come across your grail camera because some old guy out in the boonies just left one sitting in his barn. It is not an impossible story, and it has happened to me quite a few times, and I hope that it happens to you. And if it has happened to you, let me know in the comments what camera you happened upon by chance for an impossible deal. I would love to hear about some of y'all's good luck, and hopefully spread some good luck to anyone else out there who needs it. Now, I do have another follow-up video for this coming. We're gonna talk about how I light and compose a lot of these scenes, because a lot of you guys have been asking, and I really wanna share that knowledge because I'm willing to bet that while I love my work and I'm really good at what I do, there's somebody out there who's better, and all they need is just a little bit of push, a little bit of inspiration. And I feel like gatekeeping knowledge is just not the way to do it. So I wanna tell you guys all the secrets that I have learned over the years in creating these photographs. So stay tuned. Like I said, hit that subscribe button. Notification bell is gonna let you know exactly when I post that video sometime in the next week or so. And hope to see you guys then. Peace.